We're reading from 1 Samuel 26. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Yeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 select Israelite troops to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah, facing Jeshimon, but David stayed in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of the army, had laid down. Saul was lying inside the camp, with the army camped around him. David then asked Ahimelech, the Hittite, and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, "Who will go down into the camp with me to Saul?" "I'll go with you," said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul, lying asleep inside the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has given your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him. Or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go." So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping, because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, "Aren't you going to answer me, Abner?" Abner replied, "Who are you who calls to the king?" David said, "You're a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men must die, because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where is the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." And he added, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord and king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering. If, however, people have done it, may they be cursed before the Lord. They have driven me today from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, 'Go, serve other gods.' Now, do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains." Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you consider my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Surely I will act like a fool. Surely I have acted like a fool and have been terribly wrong." "Here is the king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord gave you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." Then Saul said to David, "May you be blessed, David my son. You will do great things and surely triumph." So David went on his way, and Saul returned home.
Now, it's interesting to me how the big subjects of life and culture just keep popping up as we journey through 1 Samuel. We live in a time when forgiveness is in really short supply. It's in short supply. It's given rise to the recent cultural phenomena called cancel culture. Cancel culture. You get a raised really quickly. If you get caught offside, not on a football pitch, but in the game of life, if you're caught offside, there's no VAR to call to. Maybe that's a good thing, but let's move on from sport. But cancel culture is this. If you promote a set of beliefs that is socially unacceptable, then the rest of society withdraws from you. Whether you're an individual or whether you're an organization, they withdraw their support, they withdraw their custom, they withdraw their attendance, they withdraw from you, and you're left all alone offside. You've been cancelled. There's no voice for you, there's no income for you, there's no employment for you. You've said something that is culturally offside, and so you're kind of exiled. You're kind of driven out. There's no place for you here. There's no way back. You are offside. It's incredibly difficult. And forgiveness is certainly not an option because forgiveness is in short supply in our culture. Now, why do I raise that? We're continuing in the book of 1 and 2 Samuel, and we're looking at the life of David. And in the life of David, there's just this huge body of literature. There's so much content that we're struggling to cover it because there's so many themes and verses about his life. But notice what this particular episode in 1 Samuel 26 has to say to us. It has a lot to say about the theme of forgiveness. A lot to say about the theme of forgiveness, about what it looks like to love people who have wronged you, to forgive people that have crossed you, to give people a second opportunity or a 50-second opportunity to people that have made your life difficult or hard. And what we're going to see is how to, from the lips of Jesus, how to love your neighbor and how to love an enemy and how to love someone who considers himself a fool. So let's begin first of all by thinking about how to love your neighbor. How do you love your neighbor from this passage? Let's get our context. David is on the run. David is on the run. He's nowhere to lay his head, and he is a fugitive living in the wilderness. He's surrounded by some of his warrior friends, but the number of friends he has, you could probably count on one hand or two at the most. And King Saul is after him. Saul would love nothing more. It's the aim of his heart, it's the motivation of his spirit to end David's life because David is a threat to Saul's kingdom. So he wants to take him out. And he's thought creatively about how to kill him. And he's getting less and less creative, and now he's getting more and more consistent because there are so many similarities between our passage, 1 Samuel 26, and 1 Samuel 24, including the GPS coordinates. In 1 Samuel 24 and 1 Samuel 26, both chapters begin by Saul receiving GPS or a briefing from his security department. This is where David is. We found him. Send out 3,000 troops, 1 Samuel 24, 1 Samuel 26, because we've found him. His intelligence officer has delivered the daily report of David's whereabouts. Now's my opportunity, says Saul, in his dastardly rubbing of hands. Grab my spear. We're going to go and do what I've always wanted to do to David. We can take him out. And so verse 1, in comes of 1 Samuel 26, in comes the intelligent briefing. Verse 2, we read that 3,000 men are gathered by Saul and they head out to the location. And one night they set up camp because they're going to attack David perhaps tomorrow. And they set up camp with Saul at the very center with his spear and his water jug next to his head, there for safekeeping, there so that he can spring up if there is enemy warfare and he can defend himself with the spear by his head. And he's there in the middle of the camp, the securest location with all of 3,000 men around him. He is impenetrable unless the Lord works. But with God's help and a spiritual, naturally deep sleep, like the one God used in Genesis chapter 2, where Adam was used to create Eve, and like the one, the Hebrew word is tardema, when God's glory walked through the pieces in Genesis 15, same word here, a supernaturally deep sleep. And here's David and Abishai, and they sneak into the camp on their tippy toes. There's no way they can get to Saul because there's 3,000 men, but God has been at work. And without waking anybody up, Abishai, verse 8, sees the opportunity before them. Today, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear, his own spear. I won't strike him twice. Now, young people, that is what you call a flex. That is Abishai saying, I'm a skilled warrior. I can take him out with one blow. And actually, I'm going to use his own spear. Talk about Shakespearean irony. And then we can get out of here. Look at what David says. Verse 9, he answers, he responds, not just practically, he responds theologically. He responds with a God-ordained answer. Look at verse 9. But David said to Abishai, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And this is a theme, verse 11, verse 23, throughout the chapter. Now let's just think about what's being said here. Why does David not want to lay a hand on him? Remember, please, that God anointed, through priestly oil, God anointed for himself prophets. There was anointed prophets and anointed priests, and there were anointed kings. He gave these individuals specific dignity for a specific purpose for a limited time. And those anointed prophets, priests, and kings were there to serve and to save God's people. That was their twin role, their twin task. And here's David, verse 9, and he's saying, with his enemy right before him, at his feet, fast asleep, defenseless, in himself, to paraphrase, Saul does deserve to die. But he's not worthy in himself, but he's the Lord's anointed. God has anointed him. God has given to Saul special God-centered dignity. Special God-centered purpose. He has a sacred dignity. He needs to be treated as such. He needs to be treated with special honor. He has to have his life protected because of who he is. He is the Lord's anointed. Now, what has this got to do with us? This is 3,000 years ago and 2,000 miles away. Friends, every human has special dignity about them. It's not just prophet, priest, and king. Genesis chapter 1 says that we're surrounded, like David, with people who are enemies, people who sometimes we don't like very much at all. But we're to treat them with special honor and special dignity because of whose image they're made in. Genesis 1 says every human being is made in the image of God. They bear special dignity and a special calling on their lives. Men and women, boys and girls, and animals are not on the same footing. Humans are special. They bear God's image. They reflect his glory in some small, mysterious way. In our nature, we have a calling upon us. Every human being has sacred dignity. We're made in the image of God. It's a moral element, and it's a creative element, and it's an anointing element in part. The fact is, we're like David in this chapter. We're surrounded by Sauls in our lives that make our lives difficult, that cut us up, that frustrate us. In fact, there are some people, perhaps even in this room, that we don't like very much. But because of the image of God, we treat everybody as God treats them, which is infinitely precious, which is worthy of absolute dignity and respect, no matter who they are and no matter what they've done, because they're part of God's creation and they bear his image. David looked at Saul who had caused him so much pain, Saul who had thrown spears at his head, Saul who had caused David to live at no fixed address for quite a long time by now, and at great risk to himself. Here's his opportunity to wipe his enemy off the face of the earth, and he treats him not vindictively, he treats him graciously. He treats Saul with special dignity, and we're supposed to do that to everybody around us. We should be kind and gentle to everybody. We should treat them as the God image-bearing person that they are. So we're to love our neighbor as ourself, to quote Jesus. We should be non-exploitative in our relationships. We should not step on people or tread on them to get somewhere else because they bear God's image. Friends, how are we doing in this? How are we doing, especially behind closed doors, when we're tempted to vent to our loved ones about that person over there, that person at work, that person at church, that person, and so on? How are we doing in this with our lips, with our thoughts, with our actions? What does it mean to love your neighbor? Treat them with the God-centered, God-empowered, God-imparted dignity that they bear. Here's the second one. How do you love an enemy? How do you love an enemy? Now, this is tough. More directly, this passage teaches us something explicitly about how to love an enemy. How do you love someone who has wronged you? How do you love someone who has caused you a lot of pain? Notice what David, please, says to Abishai about not taking revenge on his enemy Saul. Verse 10. Verse 10. As surely as the Lord lives, he said, David speaking, the Lord himself will strike him, Saul, or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. Notice how the three very different outcomes that David lists off there. It's worth thinking about. It could be that God will say, Saul is so wicked, I'm going to strike him down dead with a zap from heaven. Right there, right now, pow. God could do that. Here's the second option from verse 10. He might die from a good old age. Or thirdly, he might die in battle. And those are very different outcomes that David sees. But the point is this. Abishai wants to take him out with one flex of a muscle and one thrust of his own spear. David says no. David is thinking theocentrically. David is looking at God's perspective on the whole situation. And the point is this from David's heart, who has the Spirit of God in his being. God alone knows the motives of Saul's heart. God alone knows what Saul deserves. And God alone has the authority and has the right to administer justice when he sees it fit. God alone knows. Now, I want to stop here and think about the principle of forgiveness. The principle of forgiveness when it comes to our enemies. The why, the what, the how. The why, the what, the how. This is difficult. Number one, why should David forgive Saul? Why should David forgive Saul? Because the Bible teaches us that you and I live only by God's mercy. We live by God's mercy. We move and have our being by his grace. And therefore it's absolutely unjust to withhold mercy to someone else. Do you see the logic? We receive mercy, so who are we to forgive other people? Well, we're to forgive others because we've been the recipients of God's mercy. If we've received God's forgiveness, who have deeply hurt us, then we are unjust if we don't forgive other people. See those references in Matthew and Mark, please. David is doing something profound here. David, by forgiving Saul and not taking vengeance on Saul, has made sure he will not himself become another Saul. What do I mean? Well, think, if David had taken the opportunity before him, if he had been thinking in a worldly way, he could have struck down Saul in his sleep. No fight, no difficulty. He just needed to put the spear in his neck, and then he needed to run as quick as he could away from 3,000 people. But then what would have happened? If he let his vengeance get the better of him, if he'd let anger to boil up and boil over, if he'd let himself get to the place where he was self-pitying, where he was self-absorbed, all the difficulty you've brought into my life, the spears I've had to dodge from your hand, I thought you were going to forgive me, and yet you've not done it. But by killing Saul in that moment, David would have put another Saul on the throne himself. Do you see the logic? The fact of the matter is, if you don't forgive people, you will, in some way, become somewhat like that person. And that's a terrible thing to think about. If you stay angry at someone, you can feel very sorry for yourself. If you stay angry, it makes you feel kind of noble and self-righteous. Don't you know that I've been hurt? But if you hold on to that hurt, it can shape your heart. If you hold on to that hurt, if you stay angry at someone or an organization, you can feel able to justify yourself. They hurt me. You don't know. You'll never understand. No one's experienced hurt like me. You can have a blank check to indulge in self-indulgent behavior. And especially you can indulge in cruel behavior towards someone else as well. All if you hold on to it. The Bible says, David shows us, we all have to forgive people who have hurt us deeply. And if you don't, to some degree, the evil that's been caused against you will seep into you. And somehow it will shape your heart in a dangerous and a hardening way. That's the why. Here's the what. What is forgiveness? What are we talking about when we think about the word forgiveness anyway? This is what I think it means. When someone wrongs you, to forgive them is a commitment. It's a commitment that you grant before you feel. Okay? Forgiveness is when someone wrongs you, it's to forgive them. It is a commitment that you grant before you feel it. Here's the commitment. I commit in my spirit, in my heart, not to bring up to that person that hurt me in order to punish them. I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to bring it up in order to punish them. But neither will I bring it up with other people. You know, so-and-so, they really hurt me. And you're doing that to incite someone else so that they then go and hurt someone else that hurt you. You're hoping if you bring it up with other people, they will punish the person. They'll trash their reputation. They'll give them the cold shoulder. They'll turn the other cheek and all that stuff. But also, it's a commitment to not bring it up in your own heart again. When you see that person, when you think about that person, you will not let yourself, because you've forgiven them, you're going to act upon it. I'm not going to bring it up in my own heart again. I'm not going to spend time thinking about it. I'm not going to resent them. I'm not going to replay the tape. That's always accurate because it's my version of events. That sort of thing. David does all of this. Look at verse 19. David is talking to Saul. It's very subtle. Now, let my lord the king listen. Think what David could have said to Saul. You psychopath. You crazy man. He could have just put expletives in there that I won't even list off. You bitter, sad, twisted. What's wrong with you? Don't you know what you've done? He doesn't say any of that. How does David speak to Saul? Verse 19. Now let my lord the king. It's very powerful. It's clear the reason that David is not killing Saul, and he's not even going to let Abishai kill Saul, is because in his heart, David somehow has forgiven Saul, his tormentor. He doesn't think ill of him. He's thinking and speaking and expressing respect to him. This person that has caused him so much difficulty and challenge in his life. Verse 19, my Lord the King. What is forgiveness? Here's what it is. Don't bring up old scores to punish them. Don't bring it up with other people, hoping they will punish them. And don't bring it up in yourself, constantly thinking about it and hoping somehow punishment will fall from heaven upon that person. Now that is a commitment. A commitment. You grant it before you feel it. Thirdly, how do you do that? Okay, how do you do that? Now here's how. Because when you offer forgiveness, there's always a cost to pay. There's always a cost to pay. It hurts every single time you seek to enact the forgiveness and keep the commitment. You know how much it hurts, because when you have to pay the debt, it's either you who pays or someone else. And that's what forgiveness is. It's paying the debt. Think about a car. Here's the car. Someone gets, hey, you can borrow my car. No problem at all. I've only had it a week. No problem at all. I know you're a great driver. I know you passed last week. And so on. Friends, if you own a car and you give it to that new driver and they write it off brilliantly, they refashion it into their own likeness by using a lamppost or three in a car park or something like that. You know what it's like? Sorry, I've had an accident. You get the keys back, but the car looks very different. And I said, look, you have one job and look at what you've done and so on. When that happens, when there's great damage to the car that you lent to a friend, someone has to pay. What are the choices? You pay or they pay? And you say, don't worry about it. I've just got loads of money in the bank. It won't be a problem. Doesn't matter if my insurance goes through the roof. or you pay without going for a car with a car for a while. Someone has to pay when damage is done, when there's been something like a car getting written off. Look at Abishai, verse 8. Today, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Abishai must have said, you are crazy not to do this. Just take him out. This person who's asleep, he could kill every one of us. And if he doesn't, these 3,000 men, any one of them could kill us. But David, by not killing Saul, was paying a very, very big price. David was risking his life afresh. He was making himself incredibly vulnerable. But you see, friends, forgiveness is always costly. It's always really costly. You either pay or you make someone else pay. But that's what it means to love your enemy. To love your enemy. But how do you love a fool? How do you love a fool? Notice verse 21. See how Saul speaks about himself? Saul says, I've acted like a fool. I've acted like a fool. In the Bible, the word fool speaks of a willful person who is ignorant to their own faults. Okay, they're willfully blind to their own faults. In modern language, like on the screen, it's called denial. It's called denial. Now, how do you love someone who's in denial? David shows us how. And you need a lot of wisdom. But how does David love Saul? He doesn't simply forgive him and go away. Look at verse 12. He's in the camp. His opportunity is there. He ignores the temptation from Abishai. Verse 12. He takes the spear. Verse 13. He goes to the high place where he's safe from assault from Saul. And he can be heard as he speaks to Saul, hopefully. Verse 14. He calls down. The first person to hear his voice is Abner, who's Saul's general. But then Saul hears the voice of David and wakes up. And David says, look, I was just down next to you. I could have killed you. Here's my proof. Exhibit A, your spear. Exhibit B, your water jug. Verse 21. Saul is cut to the heart. David, my son, I've been a fool. I've been a fool. Notice David is being realistic, but also aggressive in his love towards Saul. Forgiveness does not mean being passive. I've forgiven you, I'm just going to sit here I'm just going to wait for you to come to me. Forgiveness rarely looks like that. Forgiveness does not mean being passive, not in this situation anyway. He's going after Saul. He's not going after him vindictively like Saul is going after David. David, the whole rationale of this mission, why is this chapter even here? Why does David even make the daring raid in the middle of the night? Because David is motivated by pursuing the hardness of Saul's heart. He wants to forgive him. He wants to evidence that. He wants to have an opportunity to witness to the power of God's grace in Saul's experience. Look at the speech, verses 15 to 16. David is shouting to Abner, look at my love, to paraphrase. I've just loved Saul's life by not taking it. I value Saul's life and your life, Abner, as well. I could have taken you out as well for a military coup. And Saul starts to melt. Verse 21. I've sinned. What a fool I've been. Now, that's not like me. What most people do when you're wronged, when I'm wronged, is something like this. You're either like a balloon, if you might have heard this, for anger. Either I say something on the inside when you've hurt me, and I just boil against you. You can't see it, but I'm raging on the inside. Like one of those kind of toy, or rather children's cartoons where the red line is rising. You just get really angry, but you're passive aggressive and you're angry on the inside. Other people, they explode like the balloon. We just go and just talk trash about the person. This is what they said to me. I can't believe they did that. And I want everybody to hear it. I want to punish them by telling you about them and how they hurt me. And I'm in the right and they're always in the wrong. We try to make them feel as badly about themselves as they have made us feel. What does David do? David forgives Saul from his heart. So when he confronts Saul, he's not trying to make him feel bad. My Lord the King. He's trying to reclaim him. He's trying to speak into his very situation and shower God's perspective and grace on Saul. Verse 21. But he's also being realistic, and this is really important. He's also being very realistic, because when Saul speaks, verse 21, "Come back, David, my son, come back. I will not try to harm you again." Verse 22, what does David say? "Please, will you get one of your young men? They can come over. Let one of your young men come over and get it. Get the water jug, get the spear." Do you know why? Because he has the Spirit of God in him, David, and he's got the wisdom of God in him, and he doesn't trust Saul. He's been bitten once or twice at least before. He's not naive, and if you want to see the wisdom of God, just read on to chapter 27, verses 1 to 3 this afternoon, where Saul's promise is seen for what it is. Saul doesn't stick with his repentance. Friends, this is so important to hear. To forgive someone and then trust them naively is not loving. To forgive someone and then trust them naively is not loving. It's not best for them, and it's not best for you. When you confront someone after you've forgiven them, you're not confronting them for your sake. You're confronting them for their sake, and for the sake of the other people that they might wrong as well. So David is showing us an example of how to love your neighbor, how to love an enemy, and how to love a fool. But if we stop there, we should be thoroughly low and crying out, but how do we do this? And that's where I want us to finish up. Where do we get the power to do this? By learning to love God's anointed and see how he has loved you. That's where the power is. By learning to love God's anointed and see how he has loved you. What do I mean? I thought God's anointed was Saul or David. Remember what we said earlier on? When God anoints a prophet, priest, or king, someone in the Old Testament, he anoints them to save and to serve his people. To save and to serve his people. And Saul, all the way back in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel, is a bad example because he used his position, his power, to serve only himself. Do you remember? I thought you weren't coming, so I did an offering myself, and I've made an altar, I've made an image in my own name. That's how he was using the anointing that God had given him. And that's why God rejected Saul and anointed David. David is showing himself to be the true anointed one because he's not using his position to serve himself. Instead, what does David do? He commits himself to God. He commits himself to God. Look at verse 23 at the end of the passage. At the end he says this, David speaking, "The Lord delivered you, Saul, into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me." I'm not going to try to take care of myself by striking out at my enemy. I'm going to forgive him. I'm even going to try to lovingly confront my enemy and put myself at risk. I'm going to speak to him across this ravine instead of running away. It's risky, it's really risky, but I'm going to put my spirit into God's hands and trust him for the outcome. I'm going to trust the Lord. Now, as David's doing that, we see a lovely picture of the true anointed one, the Messiah, Jesus. Jesus is the true anointed one. He also, like David, was driven out into the wilderness. He too had nowhere to lay his head. When he was struck, when he was reviled, he didn't strike back. When they hurled insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. You see the contrast? David risked his life in order to forgive Saul and to reclaim Saul. Jesus lost his life in order to forgive us and reclaim us. And on the cross, Jesus says, "Into your hands, Father, I commit my spirit." Now, why did Jesus go to the cross anyway? We thought about this with our friends at Alpha on Wednesday. Why didn't God just say, "I forgive you"? Because we're made in God's image, we know when someone wrongs us, there is a need for justice. There's a price that has to be paid. When we wrong each other, we want justice. And when we wrong God with our sin, justice is required as well. There's a price to be paid. Someone has to pay. Either we pay or in Jesus, God is willing to pay. You cannot say, well, let's just forget about it. No, a price has to be paid. And that's why the cross is the center of Christianity. Jesus willingly, finally, once for all time, paid the infinite price of God's justice on our sin. And because Jesus did that, we receive his righteousness, his enoughness, his right record. So God looks at us in Jesus and he sees his beauty, not our sin. The price has to be paid. And that means there are two resources that we need provided to us by God so that we can forgive people. Here are the two resources we need to enable forgiveness. First of all, humility. Humility. You need humility to forgive people. You can never forgive someone you feel superior to. I'm looking down on you as you look up on me. You cannot forgive someone you feel superior to. The Bible says we're all sinners. There's a level playing ground before the cross, as someone's written. We don't measure up to God's perfect standard. So the gospel humbles all of us. It humbles all of us to a place where you can't feel superior to anybody. But we will feel superior to people unless we understand our position in Jesus, in the gospel. You need to have that in your mind, in your heart, that there are a lot of people out there that we've not been able to forgive because in our heart of hearts we think we're just a bit better than them. So we need to be humbled by the claims of Jesus in the gospel. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All of us have been forgiven, and therefore we can forgive other people. Because it's not just humility that the gospel gives us, it's also affirmation. It's also affirmation. The reason it's hard to forgive some people is that they've hurt my reputation. And my reputation is all I have. It means everything to me. They took away love from me. They took away love from me. They took away money from me, and I love money. And those things are so important to me, they can never be replaced. Friends, if you're a Christian, you need to know where your true wealth is. Our true wealth is in heaven. Our true reputation is in Jesus, and it is once and for all. It's unassailable. It's perfect. God has given us a name that can never change, Christian, and it's a name that will last forever. People who wrong you, people who hurt you, people who misrepresent you, they can't take away those things that are of infinite value because they're safe in Jesus. When you see that, it gets easier and easier to forgive people. And unless you see that, you never will be able to forgive because your security is in something in this world. So the gospel gives us an emotional humility. It also gives us a wealth of resources in Jesus that we must have if we want to forgive people. But if you see the anointed one as Jesus, who he is, loving you in order to forgive you, if you love him all the way for the fact that he loved you, you'll be able to love other people. If you understand his love for you, that we've been forgiven much, we can then use that love to forgive other people. It's as simple as that. Is this the air we breathe as a community? If it is, in a society where forgiveness is in such short supply, we can be agents of change, so to speak. We can be agents of forgiveness in our home, in our church, in our workplaces, on our streets, in our community. And we can do that from today. Is there any neighbor? Is there any enemy? Is there any fool that you're failing to love? Then use this, and perhaps this week, go and do it. Go and do it. Before we have our last song, we're just going to spend a moment of reflection on this. Is there any neighbor, any enemy, or any fool that I'm failing to love, that you're failing to love? And then use the resources of the gospel. And perhaps even this week you could begin that change.